Welcome. I'm Philip Pollock, and this is The Essentials of Political Analysis. I'd like to briefly introduce the book to you, talk about some questions that you might find interesting in political science, and discuss the general perspective on how you'll be able to address and answer those questions based on the skill sets in this book. We'll look at some, I guess you might call them potentially interesting questions that come to mind and maybe talk about those a little bit. A key focus of this introductory chapter is on the distinction between facts and values. We need to keep these in perspective. Of course, political science can address fact-based questions and opinions, but not value-based questions or value-based opinions. Talk a little bit about the scientific approach, not so much the scientific method yet, but a couple principles of the scientific approach in political science, and I'll offer some concluding remarks. Well, here's a question. In fact, President Obama suggested this would be a reform that the United States should pursue. Many democracies have mandatory voting. Would mandatory voting in the U.S. increase the representativeness of the electorate? What would the effects be if everyone were required to vote and perhaps fined if they did not vote, or have to pay a tax if they did not vote? It's an interesting question. This is a kind of question as well that political scientists think about and simulate. We can simulate what an electorate would look like if mandatory voting were required in the U.S. It's interesting. A lot of political reform questions are really open to the sorts of methods that you will learn. Here's another one. One's a factual assertion, and then there's a kind of a skeptical question. We can show that women are more likely than men to vote Democratic. I wonder why that is. I mean, if you look at, compare women and men, gender is not the only thing that makes them different. Women on average make less money, have lower incomes than men do on average. And one could wonder if it's really a gender-based difference in terms of voting, how much of the gender gap is explained by income differences between women and men? This is also the kind of question, when we get to chapter 5 in the book, 4 and 5 in the book, we'll learn to control for rival explanations for the same phenomenon. And here's a real important, it's a standard question in comparative politics and political development. Does economic development cause countries to adopt democratic forms of governance? Well, that's a big question, and it's an important one. You can analyze data, learn to analyze data that compares poorer countries with richer countries and also compares their political systems. You could devise a theory, an explanatory process that might explain this difference based on income or wealth. These are the sorts of questions we ask all the time as political scientists. As political researchers, we observe the political scene and create explanations for what we see. We might just notice something that varies, and we want to construct an acceptable, plausible explanation for it. It doesn't have to be correct, but it does have to be testable to find out if it's correct. We're going to frame hypotheses about political relationships. This is covered in the text as well. How to frame a correct hypothesis, how to correctly frame a hypothesis. The first part of the book, particularly chapter 1 and chapter 2, those chapters are focused on making measurements of political phenomena. We have to have accurate measurements of the concepts that we wish to discuss, empirical, concrete measures of political phenomena. We learn to test hypotheses about relationships. There are several, more than 2 or 3 or 4 types of methods we use: cross-tabulation analysis, mean comparison analysis. In this book, you'll also learn correlation, regression analysis, and logistic regression. And finally, I think it's important to recognize that political research does not take place in a vacuum. We exchange ideas, we discuss with our peers, with your fellow students, with your instructors. Political scientists go to conventions all the time and present papers, and it's a vital part of the process to exchange ideas with other researchers and discuss the merits of various explanations. Now let's talk for a few minutes here about facts and values. This is an interesting and important distinction. You're interested in political science probably because you're interested in politics. That makes a lot of sense that you would be. And you're interested in politics probably from a values perspective. There are certain goals you would like to see achieved in the political system and certain other goals you would not like to see achieved. And so we have to make a distinction between the kinds of questions we can deal with in political analysis and the kinds of questions we cannot. Political analysis does not deal with questions of value. For example, here's a great question. You probably thought of this. Should wealth be more equally distributed in the United States? Well, you can really start a political debate, a rigorous political debate, discussing that question. But we can't answer should questions. We can, however, answer questions of fact. Is wealth equally distributed in the U.S.? Or I guess more generally, to what extent is wealth equally distributed in the U.S.? There's a venerable measure of equality called the Gini Index, which you can use to measure the distribution of, I guess, any resource really, but it's often used to measure the distribution of wealth or income. So you can place the U.S. in perspective with other countries, and then one could ask what causes, we could push the question farther and ask, why is it that wealth is inequitably distributed in some countries and more equitably distributed in others? So keeping with this theme, I don't mean to suggest that the skills that you learn here won't help you argue your political points. I mean, you have a political opinion, perhaps on abortion or gun control or same-sex marriage. And if those opinions that you hold and that others hold are based on facts and not values, then indeed the skills you learn can help to further the debate and to perhaps shape opinions, your opinions and those of others. If one says, I support gun control because all violence is morally wrong, that's a value-based opinion. We all have value-based opinions. And empirical data analysis and political research can't really impact those types of opinions. But consider this. If one says, I support gun control because it reduces crime, fewer guns, less crime, that's an empirically based opinion that connects two facts, the prevalence of guns and the incidence of crime. To the extent that we can answer this question, and of course a lot of scholars have addressed just this question, we can affect opinions and really have an impact on, at a higher level, have an impact on policies that go forward in the political system. So there's a lot of practical application to political analysis properly done. Political research cannot affect value-based opinions, but we can inform fact-based opinions. So here are some themes, sort of a mindset to take into political research. Political analysis requires clarity, questioning, skepticism again, intellectual exchange, it's openness, and discipline. You have to learn some basic methods here and apply those rigorously. It also involves openness, creativity, and imagination. I mean, when you construct explanations for something you're interested in, you can be imaginative. You can be imaginative as long as it's plausible and testable. It's really it's a liberating experience to think up explanations. The basic logic and methods, measuring and describing variables, coming up with theories, testing hypotheses, understanding statistical inference, gauging the strength of relationships. These things have really not changed in many, many years. One of the methods that you will learn in the book, the chi-square test of significance, was invented, I believe, in the 1890s. I think Carl Pearson developed the chi-square test. It's just, and we use it because it works. And so this isn't a field that you'll have to keep relearning. All these skills are very durable. The skills that you learn in this book are durable.